Well, hello, and welcome to Rally FC, the Ghostwriter podcast on the Flying Cow. Well, today, I'm doing something completely different for this final episode of Rally FC. Well, as far as I know, anyway. I actually am here completely alone speaking to you because, as you know, for the past few episodes, I have been bringing on former guests to give their thoughts on the last few episodes of Ghostwriter, as well as have conversations about the identity of Ghostwriter. Unfortunately, I had, I believe, 15 different guests, 15, 16. I forget and count Bibbs and Whitney as one. But several different guests, and I was only able to get on a fraction of those people for the last few episodes. So what I have decided to do, as you may remember, in previous episodes before the last few, every time we would get down to the point where we would talk about the identity of Ghostwriter, all of a sudden you would hear this. Ghostwriter! At which point I often would edit out the identity of Ghostwriter, as well as a good bit of the conversation that we were having about it, because I didn't want to give it away. I wanted it to be a fun mystery, a fun surprise. Well, now the cat's out of the bag, and several people who were able to contribute to that conversation were not able to have their voice heard. So what I have decided to do is to release this bonus episode and let you hear those lost conversations. Now, I do want to say that you might hear a lot of similarities in some of these conversations, because keep in mind, I was having a different guest on every time, so often we would have to rehash the same subjects. So a lot of these will touch on similar things. I often will bring up the fact that Ghostwriter sometimes handled difficult situations well, and sometimes not so well. There are also, you'll pick up on patterns, but hopefully, with the unique voices, it will still be something that you can enjoy. On a couple of these conversations, you will also hear the notes I would give to guests as we would go into this segment. I decided to just leave that in as a little Easter egg for you guys. Just a peek behind the scenes of how organized or not I was as we recorded these episodes. So I hope you find that interesting. So this first one is with my friend Allie Glonick. Allie was on for the third episode of Rally FC when we covered To Catch a Creep, the first full episode with Calvin in it. It saw the birth of...
That's not good enough, Alex.
Very fun episode. I always enjoy talking to Allie. And Allie was unique in that she was my only guest that decided to look up the identity of Ghostwriter before she came on. So we had a rather unique conversation about that. So I would like to share that with you now.
Okay, so with that being said, I do want to double check that you got the same information. So in your reading, what did you find out that Ghostwriter was?
Do you want me to spill it?
Yeah, I'm gonna blank it out, and
Oh, okay.
This is just for you and me right now.
Ghostwriter is the ghost of a slave who escaped and that would teach freed slaves or escaped slaves how to read and write,
Yeah.
and was caught and was murdered by hunters and their dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and you wanna know? Okay, first of all, because I do like to keep the reactions. Give me, what was your reaction when you first read that?
Because of the climate that we're in, it hit me so hard, and it makes me so upset that we didn't have that in our culture, like in our, in our narrative so
Sure.
much sooner,
Yeah.
because
I
that impact is so intense.
Yeah, I will say, unfortunately, it was never revealed in the show.
Right.
This was part of an interview that was given, in 2010. So
Yeah.
that's like
But even then, that
15
was like,
years after the show was canceled.
yeah, and it was really like 4 to 5 years before like Black Lives Matter became
Yeah.
a solid thing.
Yeah,
And it's like, imagine if we had had that as a reference in the 90s, like, who knows? Like,
yeah,
who knows how it would have helped and stimulated and affected groups of people. And you know what? In retrospect, maybe we weren't ready. Like, unfortunately,
yeah,
maybe it just was not the time, and
sure,
networks weren't willing to take a chance on it because they knew that it would be controversial
sure.
somehow.
I mean, I will say, while I do like it, and honestly, there are definitely things that the show does well and things that the show does poorly. I will say the hints that they do drop, it does 100% make sense.
Yeah.
But I will say it is also really dark for the tone of the show as it is. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they would have had to, and there are definitely episodes that are darker than others, but they really would have had to meet the tone in the right place for that to ever have been resolved.
Yeah. Well, it kind of very loosely reminds me of, like, this is such a curveball, but do you remember in Saved by the Bell the episode where Jesse gets addicted to caffeine pills?
I'm so excited.
Yes.
I'm so
And
scared. Yes,
so
I remember it.
that scene, when they first wrote that, it wasn't caffeine pills. She was addicted to like amphetamines.
Sure.
Like they went hard, and
Yeah.
or maybe it was cocaine. Like it was a straight up like hardcore fucking
Like a
drug.
drug, yeah.
Yeah, and the network was like, this is not what we're about.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And so it's like it's very reflective of like, again, the 90s. So you've got people in their 40s upward. So 40 years
writing
back,
for children. Yeah.
children basically of the 50s to the 30s ruling this narrative and saying, no, we don't talk about this. No, we don't do this.
Well, I mean,
And
there's a reason why most drug shows of that day focused on pot,
yeah.
which is not a drug that's going to cause the problems that you're going after. So, I mean, I will say there is a drug episode in this where definitely the first one, it's mostly about pot. Later on, when he's like actually showing issues, they're like, oh, it's deeper stuff. Like I think they name check a couple of things, but the main one that they focus on is pot, and I'm just like, okay, it was made in the 90s. What are you gonna do?
Right. But it's like, I think this issue goes back to that. I think that it was too big of an issue for the network to even allow to happen. Like, I don't think we would have ever seen the episode because, like, that they would have tied it back. Because, think about it too. Like, the kid who discovers it is the black kid in the series.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's in his house,
right?
In a book that's in his basement.
Right, which I think insinuates that the students that Ghostwriter was teaching grabbed the book and ran.
Yeah.
And so it also insinuates that Jamal's ancestors were slaves.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Actually, my first guess her guess as to who Ghostwriter was that he was one of Jamal's relatives. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's never explicitly stated, but you could be right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
but like, can you imagine that episode on PBS of all things? Yeah. Like, these are the people that brought us Sesame Street, and then we're going to address like racial issue and slavery.
Well, I mean, I will say, you know, you talked about how like this show is very social conscious. You know, the one thing that they don't touch at all, unfortunately, is, you know, there are no at least outward queer characters. Right. Not to say that there aren't any, but they're just not.
But this is also coming, I mean, on that topic, you're coming out of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
Which, here's a fun fact about me. I fucking love and study astrology, like, actively.
Yeah.
And my favorite astrologer, she's like a year older than me. She's grown up and lived in New York City her entire life. Mm-hmm. And one day she posted something trying to make a point about generational patterns within astrology. Sure. And she was like, if you were born between 1988 and 1992, what was your sex education like? And then she asked, like, where did you grow up in the country? And then all of this to say, her age, she was born in 90, coming out and growing up in New York City, their sex education was all about the AIDS crisis and how to be preventative in sexual health and, you know, use protection, do these things, go get tested. Mm-hmm. But literally on the Instagram poll that she did, it was something like 80 to 90% of people were not taught that. We were taught abstinence only. Yeah. And we were never taught about, like, never explicitly taught about the AIDS crisis.
Sure. I mean,
it was literally just you know, it happened because of gay people. So that's
I mean, it's generational, but it's also regional, obviously. Mm-hmm. And, you know, religions wise and all sorts of different things.
If Ghostwriter had you know, to kind of get derogatory, a weak-wristed male teacher on the series.
Sure.
Like,
I will say at least they didn't go for the joke, which is what those characters mostly were at this time.
Exactly. And that's my point. It's like, you know,
I will say, I will say there's a story arc coming up that I at least feel is very gay coded, whether or not it actually is. I mean, you know, I might be reading it wrong, but to me, I was like, this seems like these two, like, okay, the gang scene. Mm-hmm. It is obviously there's like, you know, we were brothers, but there's some attachment there that it's like, I think there was something more going on between you two, kind of thing. You know, obviously it's not. But the way it's treated, it's very much like exes.
Right. And I think that's an interesting point, too. It's like these bigger executives try so hard to cover up things and use an emotion that's misplaced or a certain amount of emotion and reaction for the sake of the drama in the series, but it's misplaced in context to the problem that they're presenting. So it's like, you know, Jessie in Saved by the Bell shouldn't have been crying over caffeine pills.
No.
Like, she should have been pissing herself and been like, guys, do you want a Coke? Like, you know, like, why am I shaking so hard? I feel out of control because of that. But if you had put it in the context of, like, I'm so tired because I've been snorting Coke for 7 days in a row and I'm so weak because I'm so skinny because I'm not hungry, that would have been better. Because I remember watching that episode and just being like, suck it up, Jessie.
Yeah.
At least you don't have a weak heart.
Jeez.
You know, like, it's just one of those things where I just think it goes back to the problem that we've seen in Hollywood of the people that are running the business. We're finding out, we always knew we're bad, but now we're finding out they're also altering storylines to fit morals and
to fit their agenda.
Yeah. Exactly. They're, which it's so fucked up because they're gonna die soon anyway. So get out.
All right, so I want to tell you one last thing and then get back in because it's still recording now. But I will say, I think they were gearing up actually to do the identity storyline in the third season, because in the first episode, they actually do a bit. There's a scene where Jamal gets chased by dogs and Ghostwriter freaks out.
God.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And he even says that he was scared because of the dogs, and he was like, I think that's a memory. I don't know what that is. And when I found out, like, I was like, that is rough. That's real rough. I don't know if maybe like that was a dry run and they were like, this is really close, or if it was just they never got, because I will say the third season only got like 3 story arcs before they just shut it down.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right.
So my next guest was Alyssa Jackson. And, you know, I don't remember how much we discussed it in the episode, but Alyssa and I had worked together in theater. Actually, she was part of a company that gave me my first acting role when I first moved to Georgia. So I hadn't seen Alyssa a whole lot before this time, but I have to say this was one of my favorite episodes. We recorded a review for the episode Who's Who, and like I said, it was definitely one of my favorites. We really just vibed. If you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend that you go back and give it a listen. It's honestly one of my favorites. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alyssa about the identity of Ghostwriter. All right. Well, I will say that the identity of Ghostwriter was something that was planted very early on in the show, and it was kind of set up that it would be an overarching mystery for the entire show that hopefully they would solve by the end. I will say there are some episodes that deal with it more than others. This is one that really didn't deal with it at all. And unfortunately, the show ended abruptly in the middle of the third season because of lack of funds. So they never actually got to explain who Ghostwriter was meant to be. But they did eventually give an interview. So I know. Would you like me to tell you?
Yes, of course.
Okay. All right. So
I want to see how wildly off base I am.
It's okay. So I will say what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to blurb, because this is a running bit. So I blurb out the actual answer, but I want to hear your reaction. But
got it.
Obviously, nothing obvious.
Yes, keep it spoiler free. I'm on it.
Okay. So, in 2010, Ghostwriter writer and producer Kermit Frazier revealed in an interview that Ghostwriter was the ghost of a runaway slave during the American Civil War. He taught other slaves how to read and write and was killed by slave catchers and their dogs.
Oh my God. Wow.
It's heavy stuff.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
Yeah, pretty heavy for a kids show.
Okay, I will guarantee that no one is ever going to guess that out of nowhere.
People have gotten close.
Yeah, oh, wow. That is fascinating. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
God, I feel like that it gives it a very, now I kind of want to go, watch an episode that, deals with Ghostwriter very specifically.
Yeah.
And, see if I can suss out any little tidbits that might...
Clues, yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, too, were the kids told the identity of Ghostwriter, and were they reacting to it?
I don't think so. I will say, in the very first episode, he is actually found. The very first scene is Jamal and his dad in their basement. They are pulling out a trunk, and when they pull out a trunk, they knock over an old book. The book falls over, Ghostwriter comes out. So basically, he was trapped in that book. And
okay.
I will also say, you could tell that they were, at the very least, testing the waters in early third season, because there's an episode where Jamal gets lost, and they look for him, and Ghostwriter reads a sign that says something about angry dog or something like that, and it freaks him out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is wild. And what an interesting thing that they could have played with in episodes that fits with the themes of the show.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I mean, at this point,
Because
I'm cutting everything from here, so you can say
oh,
whatever
okay,
you want.
got it. But if they could have explored, found, a place that was on the Underground Railroad, and they could have had something that dealt with that. There's actually a great book. It's super short. You could totally find it and read it, and I think you would get a kick out of it. It's by an author named Bruce Coville, and he wrote middle grade books, and it's called. The first book is called The Ghost in the Third Row, but there's a second book that's called The Ghost in the Manor or something, The Ghost in the Inn. Okay. And it's this girl and her best friend go to this inn in Connecticut that her dad is refurbishing, and they see this ghost, and they eventually find out that he's the ghost of a Confederate soldier, but he was being hidden. The inn was on the Underground Railroad, and he was being hidden in that room. And so he has this change of heart that he ends up leaving the Confederate Army because he realizes what the slaves were going through, and I think he's being taken care of by a person of color. Anyway, it's really cool, and it's a really interesting way of dealing with a very heavy topic, but for an appropriate age group. So anyway, just a little recommendation. I love recommending books. So
all right, so moving on, I do want to quickly mention one guest that wasn't able to come back, and unfortunately you won't hear in this episode because we actually had a very brief discussion, non-spoilery, that I didn't have to edit anything out of, was Patrick Hill. I will say, though, I loved my episode with Patrick. We discussed the final episode of season 1, Building Bridges. So once again, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back. I mean, if you haven't listened to any of these episodes, go back, check them out. They're all great in their own way. But just wanted to give Patrick a shout out because you're not going to hear him, unfortunately, on this episode. But the next guest that you will hear is Kevin Kreisel. Kevin, I have recorded podcast episodes with for my last couple of projects, and Kevin is just a great person to have on. He's always got really interesting insight. In fact, Kevin was, I think, the only person to turn the tables on me and start asking me questions. So I really enjoyed this conversation with him, and I hope that you will too.
I will say that the identity of Ghostwriter was, at least initially, a very important mystery to the show. Now, they didn't do the best job with dropping clues, but it was something that was intended to be solved. Unfortunately, because the show was eventually canceled, they never actually resolved that mystery. But there was eventually an interview given. So I have that information. Would you like to hear it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the ultimate cliffhanger, Clay.
Okay.
Come on, for this show. Do it.
All right. So, in 2010, Ghostwriter writer and producer Kermit Frazier revealed in the interview that Ghostwriter was the ghost of a runaway slave during the American Civil War. He taught other slaves how to read and write and was killed by slave catchers and their dogs.
What? Wow. That is, from my perspective, out in left field.
Sure.
Is there any context? Did they lay the groundwork for that at all?
There are certain stories where that type of thing is much more hinted at.
Okay.
And then there are definitely ones. I mean, honestly, like I mentioned in the last story, that they've gotten into the habit of using Ghostwriter more as a tool than making him an actual character. In these last couple, he is serving a bit more of the character function, but because they've kind of abandoned really dropping personal clues, those types of things haven't been tied. I mean, I will say in the first story, like the way he was found was Jamal and his dad were basically pulling a trunk out of the basement, and a book fell over, and Ghostwriter was hidden in the book. So he was kind of, like you said, probably tied to Jamal's family. We don't really know how closely or in what way. But yeah, I mean, there have been small, and I mean, there's an episode, there's a story in one of the season 3 stories where Jamal gets lost and he's looking for clues of things that are near Jamal, and he reads a sign that says something about howling dogs, and it freaks him out. Which totally makes sense when you know the story behind it. But yeah, it is one of those things that
they really did a deep cut there. I mean, I would have thought it would be something more recent or more modern, but
sure,
I could see that. I see where they came from. Okay,
yeah, I think that they had knowing everything that I know, I really like it, but I've seen the whole show. You know,
yes,
and I mean, I will say the biggest reluctance on my end is that I'm not sure how well they would have been able to approach such a serious subject, because honestly, one of the kind of social things that they addressed once and kind of fell short on was racism. There was a scene where there was an episode where they chose to address racism by Rob being in a situation where a Latinx character called him a white boy, and he asked Jamal about it. It was funny, but also like, you guys, and I mean, you know, that scene was written by a black writer, so you know, how much of what he originally wrote may have been changed, I don't know, but you know, that was their attempt, and it was kind of clumsy.
Yeah, I mean, and just from a writing point of view, they'd have to lay, like, if the writers, like, a writer's ideal dream is that you have a full season to wrap up the show, right?
Yeah.
So, assuming that they had that it's like, okay, you get one more season, write anything you want, but that's it after that.
Yeah.
Then they could lay the groundwork and make a significant push to lay all these clues for the kids to figure out, and they could use the kids descriptive method, which is very long, to describe to the audience what slavery is, what it relates to, and what happened, without going too much into the darker aspects of history there, but enough to pull out the relevant elements of why Ghostwriter exists today.
Yeah, so, and I think in certain other things, like they once did a story where they had a character who was suffering from PTSD, who had been in the Vietnam War, and they actually handled it pretty well because they addressed it on like 3 different fronts. They like kind of expressed a child's understanding of what PTSD was. Then they had, someone with kind of the clinical knowledge talk about it. And then they had the guy who was actually suffering from it describe the way that he felt. And yeah, nice. That was actually pretty well handled. But I think for a topic as hot as racism, it was a little harder for them. I will say, I think that in the right hands, this version of the show with this storyline could work really well now.
Yeah, I definitely think it could, because there's the right environment, more challenging storylines.
Yeah,
that they dig into, and then those characters exist, and you talk about them over multiple episodes. So it would definitely something they'd have a better shot at it now than they did 27 years ago.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right.
Wow, that is new information, Clay. I wouldn't have thought of that in a million years that was Ghostwriter.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let me ask you this: if you didn't know that information, if you didn't know about that 2010 interview, who do you think Ghostwriter was?
Oh, geez. I mean, I honestly, especially as a kid, I never really thought about it. I mean, I kind of always thought that it was definitely an adult, definitely someone who was looking out for them. I think probably like a lot of people have guessed, someone related to them would have made sense to me. Which, even that interview neither confirmed nor denied, because like I had a guest once that guessed it was a relative of Jamal's. Very well could have been, but also didn't have to be. So yeah, I mean, I probably would have been like in that area of guessing. I don't know. I mean, honestly, after watching the whole show, I may have considered, that, he was a slave kind of thing. I don't know how. I probably would have dismissed it and said, no, that's super serious. That's super dark. They wouldn't have gone there. But yeah.
Yeah, because as a kid, you're just like, oh, it's kind of like it's a helper that's helping them solve cases.
Yeah,
it's helping them solve the mystery of the week. And
that's all that was important to me then.
Yeah, because Ghostwriter was it was kind of like the teacher's assistant. Like, here's some clues for you. Maybe you can get it now, and maybe go over here. Maybe try this. Maybe try that. And that's what Ghostwriter kind of does from a kid's point of view. Yeah, to steer you in the right directions. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Again, that is, like I said, I wouldn't have thought of that at all, but that's amazing. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So my next conversation was with Alicia Farrar, who I don't know, can't remember if we said it in the episode, but I discovered right before we started recording, we had known each other going back to, I believe 2002, 2003. We'd known each other for quite a while. And I discovered on that day that apparently I had been saying her name wrong for years. But we rectified it. Her name is Alicia Farrar. So we discussed the episode just in time. And Alicia had the distinction of actually having had guessed the identity of Ghostwriter when she was a child. Now, how she did that? I mean, she explains it in this conversation, but I still don't fully understand because I know I never would have came to that conclusion. So once again, kudos to you, Alicia. That was quite some detective work. Maybe you should work with Ghostwriter. All right. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
First of all, I have to ask you, you mentioned, I think I heard you, do you know the identity of Ghostwriter?
So, fun fact.
Because I feel like we talked about this.
We have not actually I don't think we actually distinctly talked about it, but like, I kind of figured it out. I remember when I was a little kid.
Okay.
Because I think it was mentioned at some point that like one of the Ghostwriter's pretty fearless for the most part. Like he's not afraid to go into dangerous situations despite the fact that he's a specter, but he was afraid of dogs. And that as a little kid just struck me as so strange. Like who doesn't like dogs?
Sure.
Like that was so weird to me. I was like, well, Ghostwriter's a good person and dogs are typically, have a good sense of somebody's character. And we know it's not because Ghostwriter was a bad person, but why would he have a reason to be afraid of dogs? And like, as it so happened, we were actually talking about the Underground Railroad in school. And so one of the things that they emphasized was they would set loose the hounds. Yeah. And I remember just being like 8 or 9 and just making that connection. Sure. And it was right after I had watched the Get the Message episodes. And for him to be like, we have to join together. We have to be unified. We have to, the team is falling apart. And to have the knowledge of who and what he used to be, I remember just crying as a little, like, I didn't have any way to confirm it, of course. And of course, the PBS got taken away after that. Yeah. So I remember it was probably, about 9 to 10 years ago when all of a sudden Ghostwriter popped back in. And this is before a lot of the streaming stuff. And I was like, I want to know if what I thought he was true. Mm-hmm. And I looked up and sure enough, I was like, oh my God, I was right. I was like, me and my little casebook with my string pen. I wrote it down somewhere. And of course, the notebook's lost to time and space as well. But yeah, I remember just being so struck by that and like just being incredibly emotional. And I'm like, that makes so much sense in regards of who and what he is.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, number one, kudos to, how old were you?
8 or 9.
Kudos to your 8 or 9-year-old self because I never would. I had, now granted, he only watched what that one episode, but yeah, my guest for Get the Message, he actually, when I told him what it was shocked. He was like, that came out of nowhere. It's like, I didn't get that.
You have mentioned it before? Because I kind of went out of my way not to say what he was.
Sure, yeah.
You guys have talked about it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a bit I do on every episode. Basically, I reveal it, but what I do is when I say what it is, I blurb it out so that you can't hear it, and then I get the reaction.
So I went out of my way, and you don't have to blurb anything.
No,
hooray!
No, it's fine. I mean, I'll probably blurb out dog just because I don't want to give anything.
Too much of it.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, that's astounding that you guessed that, especially at that age. I mean, I will say, I too think it, when you put everything together, I do think it makes sense. Yeah.
It really does.
And honestly,
it's tragic, but it makes sense.
Sure. And honestly, that's one of the things that makes me wish. I'm kind of sad that they've brought it back in the way that they have, because I feel like this version of the show would be perfect for a, let's say, Girl Meets World or even new Saved by the Bell styled reboot, where they bring back the original cast but with new kids. And I'm not even saying like for a full like season. Just give us like a
mini
couple
series.
Yeah, just
to
kind of round
this
out.
4-episode arc where they solve mysteries together, and that's it. That's all.
Well, and where they finally come discover who Ghostwriter is, and we have to see what they do with that information and what can be done.
Was it ever revealed distinctly in the show?
No, the closest they had ever gotten. Honestly, I was surprised you knew about the dog thing, because that actually didn't come out until the first episode of season 3. But
I think I watched it at a friend's house or something.
Possibly.
Like, I got excited. I was like, "Do you have PBS?"
Sure. But yeah, I think that this version of the show, especially in the atmosphere that we have right now, would be ripe for a reboot to kind of give that version, the real version of Ghostwriter, closure.
Right. Well, because like the other part of it is we kind of talked about the fact that for being something called Ghostwriter is there's very few like horror elements.
Sure.
So like it would be cool to see.
It's much more about the educational aspects and stuff.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. But like it'd be very easy to do a slightly more edgy version to appeal to not just like middle schoolers or elementary kids like I was when I first saw it, but like it's like they've done with Girl Detective, Nancy Drew.
Sure.
They turned that into an edgy CW TV show. And like it's not bad. It just takes the stories that I grew up with and it just added that supernatural element to it. And I think just kind of exploring the fact that this is actually, if you really think about it, Ghostwriter is actually a very creepy premise. It's a very sad premise.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of having that reboot that actually kind of explores that side that he's a tragic character. So the fact that he has, attached himself so strongly to these kids and all he wants to do is help, like, usually when you depict ghosts are spirits that have been left behind because they have unfinished business. And so when you consider what he is or who he was and add that to it, like all he wants to do is help. He went through everything that he went to and all he wants to do is help other people. And I would love for like a reboot to explore that side. And I think that would be super cool. I mean, it's probably never going to happen, especially since they are rebooting it in this different capacity. And of course, I know nothing about the Apple Plus version of it. Would it be cool if it had the same background? Yeah, sure. But they've given him a lot more powers than they did in the other one, and it seems like it's a lot more comedic than it is educational.
I mean,
but I'm glad that they're doing
he's
the classic
more of
literature.
he's more of a magical being than
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
which he deserves, frankly.
So my next conversation is with Hannah Hyde. We discussed the episode Lost in Brooklyn, and Hannah was a unique case because although we had spoken to each other and kept in contact, we actually had never worked together. I will say, though, I was pleasantly surprised because we just jumped right in, didn't miss a beat, and I had a lot of fun hearing her takes and her opinions on some of the things that happened in this episode. This conversation isn't very long, but I really enjoyed having Hannah on, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as well.
All right. Well, with that being said, though, the identity of Ghostwriter was something that was introduced as supposedly very important, although they didn't bring it up nearly as much as they kind of made it seem like they would in the first couple of episodes. And honestly, at times, Ghostwriter became more of a tool than a character. But they did actually have an identity for him figured out, but they never got to reveal it within the show because it got canceled. But they did eventually give an interview revealing his identity. Would you like to hear it?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to tell you, this part right here is going to be cut out. This is a running bit that I do. So what I'm going to do is I am going to tell you, and when I get to the actual identity, I'm gonna blurb it out, but I want your reaction. So just when you're reacting, don't just say over and over and over again what it was, and then we can have a talk, and at a certain point I can take it out and we can say whatever we want.
Got it.
All right. So, in 2010, Ghostwriter producer and writer Kermit Frazier revealed that Ghostwriter was the ghost of a runaway slave during the American Civil War. He taught other slaves how to read and write and was killed by slave catchers and their dogs.
What? And they were gonna reveal this to children?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I was very far off base then. That's intense.
Yeah, you want to hear something even crazier? My last guest, last episode, she guessed it when she was 11.
You're kidding. How? I mean, I guess it was not covered a whole lot in this episode, but I have no clue how you would get there from what was portrayed in this show.
I will say, having seen the whole thing from start to finish, I do think it makes sense. Although you almost have to hit the right episode for it to really kind of resonate.
What are you doing in Brooklyn?
Well, okay. I will say the first episode, he is discovered in Jamal's family's attic or basement. I can't remember which. He is inside a book on top of a trunk, and when they move the trunk, the book opens and he comes out. And that first guest guessed that he was a relative of Jamal's, which they've never confirmed nor denied, but it obviously could be true. So I'm guessing that, maybe he was a part of their family or knew a part of their family that, that book just got, moved to them. But yeah, it's one of those things, like I said, I think that it makes sense how they would have introduced that, like you said, to children, especially because, I didn't talk about it a lot, but when they were handing out the stuff to Rob, they all had like different inside jokes from the show in it, and one of those actually referenced a really odd discussion that Jamal and Rob had about racism. It was real weird. And it just descended into a little bit of silliness where Jamal basically decided that Rob was pink and Jamal was brown.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like that's maybe... do they have a racist joke going? And well, there you go. It's all coming together.
Yeah, it was because somebody called Rob a white boy. So he decided to ask Jamal about being called a racial slur. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
man,
yeah. I mean,
and
like I can totally see like, the idea behind it, but I'm just like, I think there are better ways to do that.
My next conversation was with William Bibiani and Whitney Seibold from the critically acclaimed podcast network. We discussed the episode, Who is Max Mouse? I just have to say, just having these two on was an absolute thrill for me. I've been listening to their podcasts for years. They've recommended several movies that I never even heard of that I love and adore. And like I said, just having them on and hearing their insight, they are professional film critics, and their taste varies from very intellectual to just enjoyable crap. and it's great. And hearing their insights on the episode as a whole, but also this conversation, their thoughts on the identity of Ghostwriter, I found invaluable. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and please check out the critically acclaimed podcast network. Like I said, I've been listening to it for years. It is honestly my go-to recommendation for film pod. If you enjoy film, if you enjoy television, check them out. They have several podcasts on their feed, so I'm sure you will find something that you will like. Just check them out. Critically acclaimed podcast network. Yes. All right. Enjoy the conversation.
They did come up with an identity, but they were never actually able to work it in. The show was actually canceled in the middle of the third season, and it was never revealed. However, they did eventually have an interview in which the identity of Ghostwriter was revealed. Would you guys like to hear it?
I would very much like to hear it. Yes, thank you.
So, this is a running thing that I do. So the way that I usually do this is right before I reveal it on the audio, I blurb it out. You'll hear it, obviously. But because I do it every episode, so it hasn't been revealed to the audience what the answer is. So I'm just looking for like your reaction. So obviously don't keep saying it over and over again because I'll have to take it out. But then we can have a discussion that will be, edited out probably. All right. So Ghostwriter producer and writer Kermit Frazier revealed in a 2010 interview that Ghostwriter was the ghost of a runaway slave during the American Civil War. He taught other slaves how to read and write and was killed by slave catchers and their dogs.
Oh my God.
Wow. I don't know about that.
So it's a sequel to a Tarantino movie?
It's that's a big old can of worms. Like, we're just learning about hacker stuff. Let me tell you what Ghostwriter is really about. They're like, this isn't really fun anymore. It's actually just dark and disturbing and makes me think about how messed up the world is. Funny enough, it reminds me of the 100 Lives of Blackjack Savage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what would a dead escaped slave want to do with a bunch of junior high kids solving hacker mysteries and stuff?
Like, what's the motive now?
Yeah, like what is moving this character to this now?
I will say, like, in the first episode, he was actually discovered in Jamal's attic. He had been, like, in a book that was disturbed, and then, he came out of it. And earlier on, that kind of thing was, dropped a little bit more here and there. But, in fact, one of the guests in that episode guessed that he was part of Jamal's family, which, never revealed one way or another. But, yeah, right. There have been some episodes make more sense than others. This is definitely not one where it makes sense. Especially if this is the only one that you've seen.
Like it's like Candyman, but for kids.
Like, so yeah, if this person died in the 1860s, what do they think of AOL? It's like,
they think it's cool.
I suppose so.
Or they would.
Mm.
Yeah, the whole idea was that he was connected to words because that was, in a way, he was a teacher.
Right.
And so
that's a good idea. That's rock solid. I like that. It's just, and listen, it's not even necessarily like a bad motivation or anything like that. It's just really heavy for a kids show.
Yeah,
I could see that. I could see that in a kids movie.
Yeah.
Learn. Oh, look! I have this ghost friend. Actually, let me tell you about this thing that your parents aren't telling you about.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think that's one of the reasons that they struggled with, that they were never able to reveal it. There actually was an episode in the first episode of the third season where Jamal gets lost and Ghostwriter is looking for words around him. And there's a sign, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it's something about like dogs, and it freaks him out. And so, like, they were dropping those types of, starting to drop those hints, but especially when you know it, you're like hearing that, it's like, ooh, that's real heavy. And so you can kind of see why they were trepidatious to keep dropping these hints in this show that, yeah, sometimes is, does deal with very serious stuff. And like I said, sometimes they handle it really, really well. Sometimes they fumble it. Like I said, the Vietnam thing I thought they did very well, but then later on they did an episode, and it was mostly about like gang violence and stuff, but there was also one bit where a racial element came up, and they decided to make the person dealing with the racism the one white character on the show. He got called a white boy, and he asked Jamal about how this is, and you could tell the conversation was awkward, and then it devolved into a comic moment where Jamal said, "Well, you're not really white, you're pink, and I'm not really black, I'm brown," and it was like, it was real awkward. Yeah, so
that's that 90s fantasy of living in a post-racial America. It's no.
That was a big thing in 90. We were just talking about this on The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. It takes place in the Old West, and one of the two main characters is a black man played by Julius Carey. Right. And like, I think in maybe one or two episodes we hear something that's vaguely racial, but the attitude of a lot of 90s shows was, we are now post-racial. It's all taken care of now. And so
except they would also do an episode which was very racist to like Chinese Americans.
Post-racial when it comes to African Americans, but when it comes to the Chinese, okay, we're just going to throw in all the stereotypes. Yeah, it was just...
We had a long way to go, and even the things that people thought were... Well, yeah, even the things that people thought were positive or at least good-natured, they weren't necessarily healthy, and they weren't really good lessons to teach people the idea that racism is over.
Yeah.
Was a bad thing to teach people. So...
Honestly, I wish, because this show has actually been rebooted a couple of times. I wrote you guys about one of them, because one of them actually fits the rules for cancel too soon. I think like a year or two after this one, they tried to bring it back. And then they brought it back recently, but it's always been completely different, like had nothing to do with this backstory or these kids or anything like that. So completely different show. But I have felt, especially rewatching this, that this might be something interesting to revisit now if it's handled correctly.
I agree. I think there's a lot of material here. So thank you for inviting us to explore this thing that we both were only tangentially even aware of, really.
Yeah. Lurking around, give me a chance to taste something that I had left behind so long ago.
Yeah, no problem.
And this final conversation, we had a few more. We had, I think, one more episode with Jack Allison, but Jack Allison was also on 4 Days of the Cockatoo, so you got to hear him plenty. But for this episode, Don't Stop the Music, my friend Jonathan Harrell guested with me on this episode, and I loved this episode because Jonathan and I have been friends for years. In fact, when I originally came up with an idea for a podcast, Jonathan was originally going to be my co-host. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out, and he decided to have a family instead. Good on you, Jonathan. But he was able to come in and guest on this episode, and it was so much fun. It really is. It's always great podcasting with someone that you just have easy conversation with, and I always have with Jonathan. So I hope that you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I did having it. But they did eventually give an interview where they revealed the identity of Ghostwriter. Would you like to hear that?
Wow. First off, I didn't know that the show got canceled so soon, but also they actually bothered to reveal who Ghostwriter was. Like that is very fascinating. Am I saying who Ghostwriter is, or do you have the answer?
I asked you, would you like to hear it?
Well, yeah, I would like to hear it.
All right. So, sorry, I was like, I'm assuming he's saying yes, but I didn't hear an answer.
Yes.
So I'm just going to double check.
I didn't say the exact word yes, but yes, that's interesting because this whole time I've been trying to figure out who this person is.
All right,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
The way I do this is a running bit I do in every episode. So when this comes out, my revealing of the answer will actually be blurred out, but I will get your reaction. So just in your reaction, don't keep saying it over and over again. And then we can have a discussion, and I'll keep however much of it that I want to. Okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if any of that made sense. That's okay.
All right. So Ghostwriter writer and producer Kermit Frazier revealed in a 2010 interview that Ghostwriter was the ghost of a runaway slave during the American Civil War. He taught others how to read and write and was killed by slave catchers and their dogs.
I'm sorry, I can't handle this.
It's a lot to take in, huh?
Man, I was like, what is the weirdest possible answer that I could think of? And I was like, oh, this like English teacher who was like murdered in the like early 1700s, you know, and like all she wants to do is teach. I never in a million years would have come up with something like that.
Right?
Oh my God.
You want to hear something even
that is
weirder?
Incredible. Oh my God. Please.
Do you remember from the drama company Alicia Farrar?
Yeah,
okay.
I do.
So I had her on a couple episodes ago. She told me, and she said she wrote it down in a notebook. When she was a kid, she guessed this.
What? But how? How do you...
I will say,
do you piece it together?
I will say, if you watch more, there are certain episodes where they drop more clues. Like in the first episode, he is released from a book on top of a trunk in Jamal's attic. My first guess actually guessed that he was a member of Jamal's family. Never confirmed nor denied.
Yeah.
But then later on, in an episode actually coming up, there is a scene where Jamal gets lost and Ghostwriter goes looking for him, and he sees a sign near where Jamal is. This is, I can't remember exactly, but something about like snarling dogs or something like that, and it freaks him out.
Interesting. Wow.
Which, with this knowledge, that's like, whoa, that's dark.
That is insane. Like, I mean, they touch on such weird things like that, though. Like, it seems to fit, like, the whole mugging and, like, how we didn't talk about this, how they were like, oh, well, they want to stop the director. We need to get a warrant for him, you know? And she was like, well, no, you can't have a warrant without probable cause. And, like, they go and explain, like, how a warrant works. And I was like, that's not something I need to know as a child, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, they touch on such dark things like that sometimes. That is... I did write something down about Ghostwriter. I was like, I knew that Ghostwriter is old because he used the phrase "back in a jumpin' jack flash," and I was like, that is not the most old-timey saying I've ever heard in my entire life. I don't know what is, but that I never would have guessed something like that.
Well, I mean,
Never.
that's like more like 70s, but yeah.
Still, though, it's old to me. Like
Sure.
that sounds ancient.
Yeah.
But man, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed these lost conversations, these discussions about the identity of Ghostwriter. Like I said, this show was a lot of fun to do, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing it. But this is the end of Rally FC, unless, of course, somehow somebody connects me with Blaise Berdal or Matiana Morales or any of the Ghostwriter cast, Marcella Lowry, in a second. Anybody, if you know anybody, I would happily have a conversation with any of those people. But outside of that unforeseen possibility, this is the final episode of Rally FC. However, it is not the end of the Flying Cow. No. In fact, coming next week, we have the start of a brand new project. It is Movie Battles. That's right. It is basically a Disney Pixar trivia competition. It is a full tournament. It's an 8-person tournament, so there will be 7 matches in all the way up to a championship match. We recorded these matches all this past weekend, and I got to tell you, you guys are in for some good stuff. I'm really looking forward to releasing the very first match next Thursday. So check that out. We will also not only be releasing on the Flying Cow podcast feed, but we will also be releasing on our brand new YouTube channel. So when that drops, all you have to do is type in the Flying Cow or Movie Battles, and it should come right up for you. Don't try it yet because there's nothing on the channel yet. You won't get anything. But once that drops on the 1st of April, you will have access to Movie Battles on YouTube and here on the Flying Cow Podcast Network. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed yourself, and maybe we'll see you again on Rally FC. But until that time, Ghostwriter out.
That's not good enough, Alex.